the 6th century. With the one exception that it extended right down to the Mekong Delta near Saigon, south of Saigon, and even today there are significant Khmer-speaking minorities, Cambodian language-speaking minorities in the Mekong Delta. This was Khmer land, it wasn't Vietnamese land. It got colonized by the Vietnamese much, much later. From Da Nang, central Vietnam, this extraordinary relief of a yaksha figure from the basement of probably what was an open pavilion decoration, very Gupta in style. Those of you familiar with look at the curls of the hair, the great kundaka ear ornaments, and so on, the hands on the hip, very much in the Gupta manner. Then I move on to the issue of the arrival of Buddhism. Difficult subject because it's so wide-ranging, but I focused on two areas. The first was the Malay Peninsula. Kedah, many of you all know the name of Kedah, the modern state of Kedah in Malaysia near Penang Island, almost certainly the Arabic Kala from the ancient geographers. Kala was a well-known stopping point, and there are significant Hindu and Buddhist remains there and international trade goods there. This is one of the early temple sites. I had the great privilege yesterday to see the object on the left of the screen. This is one of two Thanksgiving stones, memorial stones erected by Indian merchants, or merchants with Indian names. It seems to be a thanksgiving for safe passage. They've done their journeys, and they're still, they didn't drown. They've survived the journeys. The one on the left was found in 1834 by an East India Company officer, Captain Lowe, and he very wisely shipped it straight off to Calcutta because there was a great museum in Calcutta, and here it is today. So I saw it for the first time yesterday. It was a very special moment for me, I can tell you. It not only has Buddhist text around in the inscription, it also names the donor. And he's named as a mariner, as a ship's captain, uses the name Buddhagupta. So this is a very important document, as well as giving us a very clear depiction of a southern Indian style stupa. The second one on the right, which I had in the exhibition, was only found about 20 years ago in another part of the same river estuary in Kedah, and is in the small site museum now in that valley. Next, please. Small Buddhas, clearly Gupta in style, but probably produced in Southeast Asia. Again, from the same region. And this brings us to another very interesting topic, which is what I would call the missionary Buddhas. There are a series, not so many, but a number of large-scale bronze Buddhas, by which I mean Buddhas in metal in excess of 1 meter in height. So these are technically complicated to make, and they're very expensive to make. 1 meter high bronze cost you a lot of money today. It was probably a $1 million object, in the 8th century. To commission something of this, invest in the metal, in the technology, mercury gilding to make it, finish it off and so on, and then to ship it from wherever it was made, Southeast India or Sri Lanka, to Southeast Asia. The one on the right was found in Sulawesi. We have no evidence, no trace of any Buddhist presence in Sulawesi, none whatsoever. Was there a monastery there? We simply don't know. The bronze was found there by the Dutch 100 years ago. It remains a mystery. I'll show you at the end of the lecture a spectacular 1 meter high Amagopasha Lokeshvara Buddha, Bodhisattva, found in Malaysia in the 1930s. Spectacular object. It has to have been at the location of a vihara. That's no trace of that. They probably built in wood, so that's completely gone. But the objects survived on the location. Next, please. This piece, which sits now in the Saigon museum, Ho Chi Minh, 1 metre high bronze, almost certainly cast in Sri Lanka. I think by this period, by the 7th, 8th century, what was happening in Andhra Desa, in Andhra Pradesh and so on, they weren't producing bronzes of this kind. We have no evidence of that. We do know what bronzes are like for this in that period. They're not of this scale. This is almost certainly a Sri Lankan production, Anuradhapura production, and it was, in a sense, a monastic business. They were producing these large, expensive bronzes, shipping them across Asia to the Buddhist diaspora. This was discovered by chance at a Mahayana monastery in central Vietnam, Dong Duong, which has a very extensive foundation inscription dedicated in, I think it's 876, late 9th century. The object was made, within that time period. That fits quite comfortably. But to ship these objects, from Sri Lanka to Vietnam is, a significant enterprise. Then the principal area I focused on for the early Buddhist arrival was when I discovered that there might be a possibility I could have loans from Myanmar, and Myanmar had never ever lent internationally before. This was the first time they'd ever engaged in an international exhibition. So there was a high level of anxiety surrounding this process, but we succeeded, and it all had a happy ending. I focused on one of the great ancient cities of the Pyu kingdoms of early Burma, which is Sestra. And Sestra is one of these great moated cities again, fortified, with very extensive remains. A large interior urban core, and then 4 great fortified gates, each marked by a monumental stupa, protective presence of the 4 cardinal directions, and beyond that, agrarian support base. Next to the palace complex, as we understand the archaeology, this stele was discovered, which double-sided. On the right, you have this club-wielding guardian Dwarapala type figure with attendants, and on the other side, in a somewhat different style, an empty throne. Sort of sounds Buddhist, with attendants, and a textile canopy depicted above in the stone decoration. Was it some sort of throne back? Probably yes. Some sort of royal seat, and this provided the back plate to the seat. As far as this is informed guesswork. We don't, in reality, know. We've never found one in situ, or have them depicted in ways that would tell us. Next, please. It's detail. The style of the hair ornaments and so on, the wrapping of the head cloth, rather reminiscent of what's happening in Andhra Pradesh, early centuries AD. So I think clearly conversations going on between early Pyu Burma and coastal Deccan. Next, please. In this part of the world, Buddhist burial, they used secondary jar burial after cremation into a ceramic pot. And there have been examples of these discovered in the basement footings of the stupas at Nagarjunakonda and elsewhere in Andhra. The same practice happening in Pyu Burma. But if you were royal, if you're one of the Vikram family, you got a stone casket. It's inscribed. It's inscribed in Pyu. Pyu remains the only Southeast Asian language that has not yet been read. It has not yet been decoded. The names of the kings or the royal titles are in Sanskrit, so they're okay. But then it reverts to Pyu, and that remains an unread language, which scholars are working on now as we speak. But to this point, it remains an unread, a locked language. I think 7 of these stone caskets have been found. I mean, they're not numerous. in a stupa that looked rather like this. This is the Kinbar stupa within this city complex of Sestra. It's the reconstruction. Was found the single most important Buddhist reliquary of the mid-first millennium. Nothing of this scale or importance survives from India. Did it exist in India? Of course it existed, but they no longer survive. They've not come down to us. They've been looted, recycled, whatever you want to call it. They no longer exist. Next, please. The chamber was a brick chamber beneath the foundations. You see the main relic container. I think they put it back to take the photograph when they excavated this in 1924. And this stone slab formed the cover for the relic chamber with what we assume is a very faithful depiction of a 6th century stupa at Sestra. Next, please. And it contained this spectacular cylindrical relic container. It's large. It's 30 centimetres high, about 20 centimetres in diameter, gilt silver. The post at the centre may have had an umbrella, or it may have been a tree, as in the Bodhi tree, and has 4 directional Buddhas, inscriptions around the base and around the rim in pew. A mixture of pew and Prakrit. So over 120 objects came out of this container and the chamber, silver and gold. And it appears not to have been disturbed since the 6th century. A whole series of small miniature stupas. These formed, often in the East Asian context, these are often called sutra containers. They would have rolled up prayers put inside. We have only the metal containers surviving. Repuse's silver guardian figures. These probably decorated the base of an image. Yeah. Silver images of Buddhas. And we get silver tokens. I hesitate to use the word coins. We don't know, strictly speaking, whether they functioned as money, but they look like money. But they may have been tokens given out as rewards in silver. But most of the iconography of these silver tokens is Indian. The folding stool, throne, the Triratna, various others. Next, please. These token coins were produced in the 7th and 8th century and more or less disappeared by the 9th century. This is a view into the main Buddha gallery, a series of spectacular large-scale stone images of the Buddha from early pre-Angkorian Cambodia. Aesthetically very beautiful, clearly drawing on the Sarnath aesthetic, but doing other things with it as well. Very beautiful, confident, sophisticated images. And then beyond that, a small space in which we created a kind of simulated a stupa, very simple display. We just had the a platform with the 4 projecting ayaka platforms that traditionally surround a stupa for offerings, and then the central cylinder. It's a bit sort of Brancusi-like, pared down, simple stupa, and I positioned 4 Buddhas in the 4 directions. Very simple, not complex to make, not expensive. It's just plywood and whatever, but created a beautiful effect to show these 4 masterpieces of 4 Buddhas, more or less of the same time frame, all belonging around roughly the 7th to 8th century, from 4 different regions. So on the left, Cambodia, on the right, Peninsula Thailand. Next, please. This is the detail of the Cambodian Buddha, over life size. I mean, this man would have been 7 foot high. I mean, spectacular piece. Next. From eastern Thailand, Prachinburi, Buddha in meditation. You'll see the shadow behind the head of the figure with the foliage of the Bodhi tree. So you know it's site-specific. It's referring to Buddha's meditation and enlightenment at Bodh Gaya. Next. From Sestra, the only substantial Buddha that's survived from Sestra is this one, very beautiful. The full meditation, the crossing of the feet is very much a style we recognize from the Deccan. It happens coincidentally to contain the longest Sanskrit inscription that survives from Pew, Burma. Runs around, it's 8 lines, around 3 sides of the base. Very important Sanskrit inscription. And this is the Thai Peninsula piece from a place that has a very important forest monk monastery even today. And there's no reason to believe that that tradition has been interrupted, that they were probably had a monastery devoted to monastic retreats when this sculpture was made in the 7th century, and they still do it today. So it's nothing. That's an extraordinary continuity. Vishnu and kingship, an attempt to deal with the multiple forms that Vishnu appears in, the Dasa avatars and so on, but really to explore, I took as the key idea, the way in which, why was Vishnu so popular in Southeast Asia, as indeed he was in early India, with the beginnings of temple building, and it's very much linked to, how should we put this, the Vishnu provided a very good analogy, a very good role model for aspiring rulers. Virtuous, strong, martial. I mean, he has 4 arms. What is he holding? They're all weapons. You know, the chakra is not, you know, it's a weapon of war. The gada, the club, etc. The conch is not for devotional use. The conch is a war trumpet. You know, just reference the Mahabharata. You know, it's blown in battle. So he's a martial ruler, but just and benign. Next, please. So we opened with this small sanctuary, just 3-sided pavilion, in which a newly discovered Vishnu from the Mekong Delta was in a small provincial museum, had never left there since it was found less than 10 years ago, came to the exhibition centre. The great Krishna Govardhana I mentioned earlier, you can see the scale, it is really very spectacular. It's about 1.5 meters high. Next. This is the site from which it came. This is Phnom Dar. Phnom means mountain in Khmer. Just not much of a mountain, I know, but we're in the Mekong Delta, so it's pretty flat land. The highways are, of course, the rivers. And there's aerial photographs established 50 years ago, wartime photographs, that the river system was then crisscrossed with man-made canals. So it was a whole highway system active in the region in the mid-1st millennium. Man-made canals which linked the rivers. So you had a trading system which could operate all the way up the Mekong and then down into the delta with all these interlocking river systems with man-made canals. And in that way to link to the trade happening on the coast. Next, please. So on the slopes of that mountain, is a cave shrine. The main, so go back one, the main temple is on the pinnacle, a monumental brick structure. If you go back one, please. Go back. Yeah. The structure on the peak of the mountain is massive. It's about a 4 or 5 story building. And if any of you have been to Phnom Penh National Museum, there is a spectacular triad of Vishnu, Balaram, and one other. The Vishnu is 3 meters high. I mean, stunning, breathtaking. That occupied the central sanctum of this tower. In a cave sanctuary around the base of the mountain was dedicated to Krishna Govardhana, and 3 over life-size images of Krishna Govardhana were recovered there 100 years ago. This one, and next is detail, extraordinarily beautiful. I had the chance to see the only one of comparable scale and importance, which is the Gupta piece in the Bharat Kala Bhavan in Varanasi, which I saw a few days ago after many years. Marvelous object. More or less same scale as we see here. Next, please. And this is another. This is of the second of the three that were recovered. It was originally just that torso. Was bought by a collector in Brussels in 1910 or something like this, and he got a box of broken bits with it, which was shipped from Cambodia. He never assembled them. That eventually was sold 50 years later to Cleveland Museum, but they'd forgotten, the bits had disappeared, but someone in the family remembered. So diplomacy comes in. The Cleveland Museum requested to visit the home of the descendant to say, we think the stone pieces belonging to this sculpture are buried in your garden. The gardener used them for fill and for sort of edging in the garden. And this elderly Brussels lady, and Belgium's are very prim and proper, agreed to have her garden excavated. The stones were recovered and her garden was put back in good order. That is a great achievement, I think. And what it translated to 15 years later was the reconstruction of the object you see on the left. A spectacular piece of restoration conservation from what you see on the right. Next, please. Most of these structures, actually all of the structures in pre-Angkorian Cambodia are in fired brick. We don't see large-scale building in laterite and sandstone until the Angkorian period, for the most part. Sandstone was confined to the lintels, the door jambs, sometimes the frames for windows or blind doors.